Before we start the podcast, I have a very important message. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor is an app, and it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify and Apple Podcast and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now, let's begin the podcast. Hi, welcome to the 6th episode of the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different from previous episodes in that I'll be doing almost like a Bundesliga update type video. In previous episodes of my podcast, I've discussed different topics relating to German culture, and yeah, you could probably say that a Bundesliga update falls along those same lines. If you're new to the podcast, I highly recommend you follow the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you're interested in in-depth analysis and topics relating from German immigration into the 13 colonies, the roots of kindergarten and its link to Germany, East German nostalgia after the Berlin Wall, soccer and German culture, and German philosophers like Karl Marx, I encourage you to take a listen to some of my other episodes. If some of those topics interest you and others don't, that's totally okay, because I designed the podcast so that even though it's numbered, it's not really in order. So you can jump around and only listen to the episodes that interest you. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So obviously the Bundesliga has been over for a few weeks, and we are now in the summer transfer window. Bayern Munich won the league again, and they've already signed Leroy Sané from Manchester City for over £60 million, $70 million. Borussia Dortmund, RB Leipzig, Borussia Mönchengladbach, they round out the rest of the top four. And obviously, the top four qualify for the Champions League. And the Bundesliga coefficient is pretty big with their UEFA coefficient. So these clubs can expect to earn a significant sum of money from the Champions League, somewhere in the range of probably at least 40 million. Maybe, if Bayern win, they can earn 120 million, because that's how much Liverpool earned last season for winning the Champions League. For the Europa League, you have Bayern Leverkusen finishing in 5th. And it's interesting to see how big of a deal, because they only missed out on Champions League by 2 points. But their biggest star, Kai Havertz, he might leave because he wants to play Champions League football. And it can be interesting to see if he does get sold this summer. With COVID-19, they'll probably command a massive transfer fee. You also have Hoffenheim in 6th, and then Wolfsburg finished in 7th. Although clubs earn a lot less from the Europa League than they do from the Champions League, the 15 to 25 million earned from the Europa League is still significant and can definitely boost a club's financial health, especially with the pandemic. Then for the rest of the league, you have, Eintracht Frankfurt dropped off significantly from last season. Obviously, they sold Sebastian Haller to West Ham, Luka Jovic to Real Madrid. I believe Frankfurt profited more than 120, 130 million off these two players. So the club is in a better position than many other clubs at their, level to withstand the pandemic, because, they just cashed out on some of the biggest stars last summer, but I'm not sure the fans will be so happy. They would have wanted to see that money get reinvested into the squad. But generally, in terms of, transfer activity in this window, it's definitely going to be a lot less than in previous windows. The revenue streams for many clubs have been dramatically reduced. And just like all businesses during the pandemic, they're going through a very difficult time. And I think we'll probably see many loan deals, with potential options to buy for the summer of 2021. Maybe a lot of swap deals. You can see clubs looking to help each other out by swapping a fringe squad player that another team might value for a player that may fit in another team. So yeah, deals sort of like that, because with deals like this, there's no transfer fee. There isn't really a dramatic increase in wages. And yeah, so we're going to see a lot of loan deals with options to buy or not. Just straight up loan deals. You're also going to see a lot of swap deals. The only clubs that are really going to be able to, shell out big money on players are clubs like Bayern. Bayern are not going to be affected that much in this window. They just have such a massive club that they'll be able to withstand it. Um, and you're going to have a lot of teams that are going to, well, a lot of teams have done this already. They've deferred wages for their players. Like Arsenal, one of the biggest clubs in the world, they've asked their players to take a wage cut by 12.5%. Now, Arsenal's case is a little different. I don't know how many clubs are going to follow along with this, but Arsenal are self-sustaining in that any money that the club earns, they can spend, and their owner does not put in any of his own money. So the finances for Arsenal would have been very tricky, because it doesn't look as if they're going to have European football to help their finances. So the wage cut, even though they're a massive club, it's almost out of necessity. But then also with wage cuts, it's a very controversial topic, because let's say a club asked its players to take a wage cut, but then that same club goes out and then they purchase a player for, like, I don't know, maybe 30 million. Right? That's a little hypocritical, because then the players will say, like, why are we taking a wage cut? And that's a good point that they're making, because they should be, that money should be going to them first before the club is spending to bring in more players that are going to replace those players that are taking a pay cut to help the club. So that's an interesting situation, and I think it's one to definitely keep a close eye on. But more so than that, I think we're going to see the gap between, the top clubs and the lower clubs expand. And this is a massive problem, because a lot of the top clubs, they're going to see this as a fantastic opportunity to invest in their squad, because the value, it's a buyer's market this summer. And you're going to see a lot of, like, middle-ish, lower level clubs selling off their best players just so that they can survive, just so that they can manage the books, balance the books. And they're gonna be selling those players at lower prices, and you're gonna have bigger clubs that are gonna swoop in and buy those players. And it's gonna make the competition problem in European football worse. And that's not a good thing, because especially in, like, the Bundesliga, where you have Bayern Munich, and they have won the Bundesliga for 7 of the last 8 years. It's not good that the competition keeps getting. It's not really becoming competitive anymore for the title. It's unrealistic to think that any team can win the Bundesliga other than Bayern. That's including Dortmund. And it's just going to get worse this summer. It's just going to get worse, especially if you also looked at, like, the Premier League too. A lot of clubs that are financed by their owners, they're going to spend a lot this summer. And yeah, that's a major problem. Sorry about that. Okay, so back to the podcast. Um, so yeah, we were talking about the competitive problem in soccer. So, um, More so than that, I think that we're going to see. There has to be some sort of action taken to make soccer more competitive. Because really, I mean, I guess Dortmund do have a chance some years if they have a very strong team and they get off to a great start, and Bayern, are struggling. I think RB Leipzig are an interesting team in the future, even though they sold Timo Werner to Chelsea, because they are financially backed by their owner, and they also do have a lot of young talent in their squad. Upamecano, Mukiele, Konate. But I really do feel like there is a competition problem in the Bundesliga, and it's not just exclusive to the Bundesliga, but also across all of Europe's top five leagues, and it's probably even worse in like Scotland and Denmark and Greece and Turkey. But with Europe's top five leagues, they're supposed to be the most interesting and most competitive, and there are major competition issues there. Like in France, in the league, PSG makes 20 times as much revenue as the bottom club in the league. That's ridiculous. How is that club supposed to compete with PSG if they're making 20 times less money than them in a season? And, it's interesting because American sports are more socialist. European sports are very capitalist. American sports are socialist. And I think that it's an interesting debate, but I would tend to lean for sports on the more socialist side, because it's what's going to happen eventually is that these bigger clubs are going to continue to get bigger and bigger. The smaller clubs will not be able to catch up with them, and you're going to see less and less competition in these leagues, and they're not going to become as interesting because there's not going to be as much competition, and it's going to stunt the growth of these leagues. You're not going to be able to expand fans, and it's not good, because you can't have, like, imagine being a fan of a team that's mid-table in the Bundesliga, right? What are the team's aspirations if they're finishing consistently in the middle of the table? What are your aspirations, your ambitions to avoid relegation? Now, imagine if that's repeating every single year and the same sort of things happening. People will get frustrated and they're going to stop supporting those clubs. And the reason that American sports do so well is that the socialist aspect of it allows any single team to compete and win a title. And like when Leicester City won the Premier League, it was a massive shock, right? In the last 19 years, only four teams have won the Premier League in the last 19 years. In the last 19 years in the NBA, 12 teams have won, which is incredible, right? It's a stark difference. And I think if you made, football or soccer more socialist, like it would definitely increase competition, because even like, I mean, you have the Bundesliga and Serie A are a very similar position because you have Juventus who consistently win the league. Then you do have an interesting situation, 2 through like around 7 or 8. It can go, no one really knows every single year what's going to happen there. And then the rest of the league is really, it's stagnant. In Spain, it's even worse. Just Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico, and the rest. Liga is the worst. I'd say the Premier League's probably the most competitive. But, I mean, you still have like clubs like Manchester United making 700 million in a season, and Burnley making 100 million, which is 7 times, not as bad as the 20 times with PSG, but it's not good. And even if you took like Dortmund, for example, right? Dortmund, many would consider the biggest challenges to Bayern. But Dortmund, they're a selling club at the end of the day. They invest in top youth talent and they cash out on those players for larger transfer fees. And we've seen that with Pulisic, Lewandowski years ago, Ousmane Dembele, Aubameyang, Mkhitaryan, and right now they have Erling Hazard and Jadon Sancho. They're probably going to be sold too at some point. And it's a successful business model to keep the club sustainable, but they're never ever going to be able to compete with Bayern, who never look to sell their best players. Bayern always look to purchase more. Dortmund always look to sell their best players when they reach their peak value. And at the end of the day, with Bayern, Bayern's commercial revenue alongside their match day income, which by the way, a few clubs in the Bundesliga have very respectable match day incomes because there's some of the world's largest and most beautiful stadiums in the Bundesliga. But Bayern also earn the most from the Bundesliga TV deal, and they earn significant prize money from UEFA because Bayern often progress to the late rounds of UEFA club competitions. So you end up in a situation where Bayern are significantly out earning everyone else in the Bundesliga. They're continuing to spend, maintaining their on-field success and off-the-pitch financial success. And in other words, it would take a miracle for any club in the Bundesliga to win the title over Bayern, even for Dortmund. And I think this comes down to the capitalist system in European sports. And I really, really think that there needs to be more compensation, more like socialism in European football or European soccer in order to make it more competitive. Like, for example, in American sports, the worst team gets the number one draft pick in the following season. So it's giving them an opportunity to draft a future star that's a young player. And obviously, you can't have that in soccer because there's no draft. Players assigned. But maybe, maybe the TV money, instead of the most going to the club that finished top, how about you flipped it? You gave the most money to the clubs that finished at the bottom. That I would do that. That's an interesting proposal I've had because if you think about it, it's still not like punishing success because if you finish in the top four, you're going to get the Champions League money. If you finish in the top four, it's first off, it's a competition. Players play for their pride also, and you'll get the Champions League money. If you go far in the Champions League, you'll learn a lot more. But if you do give everyone a base, like my proposal would be I looked at the numbers with the Bundesliga TV deal, and I would give each club 100 million base from the broadcasting deal, and then the remaining 700 million to distribute. I would distribute it based on your position in the league. We give like 60 million to the 5 teams 15 through 20. I'd give 50 million 10 through 15, 40 million 5 through 10, and 1 through 5 30 million extra, so plus your 100 base. And I would say that this money that's allocated just from the 700 million based on the placement, I would make a rule that you would have to spend it on transfers within 2 seasons. Otherwise, it goes back to the Bundesliga. So it's free money there for you to spend on transfers within 2 seasons. And I think this would be a really interesting rule change because it would give the lesser clubs a chance. If they were smart with their money, they made a few really smart signings, and they made it happen, they would have a chance. Right now, I don't feel like many clubs have a chance. I feel like it's impossible for many clubs to compete because the financial, it's crazy how rich some clubs are and then how poor the others are compared to those clubs. And if you looked at a system like this, it would give lesser clubs. Obviously, Bayern still would earn tons more from commercial revenue, match day revenue, heck, even broadcasting revenue because they'll finish top of the league a lot. they'll make the Champions League, they'll go far. That pays out more. But a system like this would increase competition over time. The gap between Bayern and the rest would narrow. And I think that, a system like this would really help competition in the league. That would increase fans. That would draw more fans. Because you're now allowing clubs to be smart with their money, and if they are smart with their money, they now have enough money to make it possible for their club to sign good players, proper players who can make a real impact. It would excite fans. I think it would be a massive deal. And you can also look back in the day in history, right? Soccer was a lot more competitive back in the day, and that was because the money wasn't so commercialized. Soccer is more financial. I would argue the bigger part of soccer is off the pitch, not on the pitch. What happens financially dictates what happens on the pitch. And right now, what's happening financially is making it impossible for many clubs to compete. And that's not good. And I think there will be changes made. I'd say in the next 20 to 30 years, more leagues are going to realize that the lack of competition is going to screw their leagues, and it's going to really, stunt growth. And I'm pretty confident there are going to be changes made. But yeah, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion today, subscribe, follow whatever the options are on your platform. Um, if you're interested in any of the topics like, the roots of kindergarten, German immigration into the English colonies, the role of soccer in German culture, football, um, take a listen to those podcasts. But yeah, thank you for sticking around. I enjoyed making this podcast. It was a really interesting topic for me. And yeah, we'll look forward to see what happens in the transfer window. It won't be that much though. And yeah, that's it. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and goodbye.